In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the growth, structure, and function of skeletal muscle. So to get started, let's start with the structure of skeletal muscle. So you have, let's say this is your muscle here. And inside the muscle, you've got all of your fascicles. And in each fascicle, which we're going to draw down here, are your individual muscle cells. And this is important, and I'll show you why. So each muscle cell, if I pull this one out here, every individual muscle cell has a covering, and it's called the endomysium, which is here. And that covers their collagen fibers, and they surround every individual muscle cell. And then you have something called the perimysium, which is white fibrous connective tissue, and that surrounds the fascicle, and that helps to keep them all in place and bundled together. And then as you see your fascicles go back up in here, you have the epimysium. So let's say this is the bicep. Then you have the covering of the white around all of the entire muscle, which is called the epimysium, and it's epi being towards the outside or towards the surface, and it blends with the tendon. It holds its fascicles together, but it's done together with white fibrous connective tissue. And I'm sure you're wondering how blood and nerves get from the outside into the inside of the cell. Well, the way it goes is it starts at the epimysium, and then it goes in through and goes through the fascicles via the perimysium, and then it goes into the endomysium and then is delivered to the cell. And that helps to provide nutrients and remove the waste. So let's start with the basic unit of a muscle cell. You have the sarcolemma, which is the cell membrane, and then you have the sarcoplasm, which is the cytoplasm. And then you have this thing called the myofibril, which is the contractile unit of skeletal muscle. And then you have these filaments, and these filaments are proteins inside, and they help to contract. And these are the things you're going to see that create banding patterns. And you have your thick filament, which is myosin. Then you have your thin filaments, which are actin, tropomyosin, and troponin. And you start to see these banding patterns. You can see in this image the different banding patterns. So we'll go over those here in a minute. The dark band is known as the A band, and then you have the light band, which is known as the I band. So dark is the A band, and the light is the I band. And this is what causes the striation or the banding appearance in skeletal muscle. Okay, so what's in a myofibril? Well, let's start with the A band. These are your thick filaments. This, if you see here, it's pointing directly to these thick filaments. And that's the myosin. And the I band has the thin filaments. So this is going to be your actin, your troponin, and your tropomyosin. And what happens is when this thing right here is called the sarcomere, and they're separated by these Z discs. And what happens is inside the H zone is something called the M line. I know, bear with me, it feels like I'm making up a bunch of letters, but this is really what it's called. And so inside this M line, in this H zone, across this M line, these throughout the process of muscle contraction, there's going to be overlapping, and the overlap occurs in the H zone along that M line, and the whole sarcomere is going to be separated. It's separated by the Z disc, and the whole thing shortens, and that's what happens during muscle contraction. I know there's a lesson on this, and it's going to really, really explain how this whole process works. But when you're looking at these muscle striations, this is what helps to visualize all of the differences between what filaments fall in which band and along which line. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's look at the T system. The T system is the transverse system. And what happens is at the sarcolemma, which is the cell membrane, it needs to get information into the inside of the cell. And the way that it does this is it goes through these long tubules, and it sends an action potential from the nervous system to the muscle cells, and it's transferred through this tube system. And the signal is sent from the outside of the membrane all the way down to the myofilaments, and that's what causes the muscle contraction. Now that you understand how information gets from the outside of the cell down to the myofilaments, we need to look at something called a structure called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And also, we need to look at triads. Now, the sarcoplasmic reticulum is a closed system of tubules inside the sarcoplasm. And this system is the cytoplasm of the muscle cell. And there's a central network on the inside called the reticular network, which is here. And as you start to move lateral, so we're going to go away, and you're going to end up getting into these things called sarcotubules. And then at the end is the terminal cisternae. And what happens is the terminal cisternae are part of the triad. You've got two lateral cisternae, you've got one here, and then you've got another one here, and then you have the central T tubule. And because there are three parts, you've got lateral cisternae, you've got a central T tubule, and then you've got another one. And this is 1, 2, and 3. So this is why it's called a triad right here. Now, one of the responsibilities of the sarcoplasmic reticulum is to regulate the amount of calcium in the sarcoplasm, and it does this with calcium channels. So let's recap. All of the layers of the muscle have connective tissue. You have the endomysium, the perimysium, and you have the epimysium. The myofibrils are the contractile units of the muscle cell, and they consist of the sarcolemma, the sarcoplasma, and the contractile filaments. Now, the myofibril structure, you're going to have the I band, the A band, the H zone, the Z disc, and the sarcomere. Remember, the I band is the light band, and the A band is the dark band, and the H zone has the M line, which is where the crossing occurs. And then you have the Z disc, which is the end of the sarcomere. The T system is the tubule system, and that transfers action potential from the outside of the cell, from the neuron, to the actual muscle cells. And then you have the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which regulates calcium into the sarcoplasm. So that's it for our lesson on skeletal muscle and all the components that go into it. Make sure you check out all the resources attached to this lesson. Now go out and be your best selves today, and as always, happy nursing.